All right, friends, good morning. Oh, come on, people. Good morning. Thank you. That's more like it. Welcome back to Social Insurance. We are Social Insurance 2026. It is so wonderful to be with so many friends, so many of my favorite people around the social insurance community. To those of you who have been with us for the past couple of days, it's been wonderful spending time with you in the sessions, out of the sessions, during the lunches, during the hallway conversations. It's been really wonderful just being with all of our people. And to those of you who are just joining us, welcome, welcome, welcome. We are so glad that you're here. This is a really special community, and it feels really important to be in community at this time. So this morning, before we get back into the details of policy and programs, and with really a special emphasis on the future of Social Security, we're going to start today's conversations off by returning to some of the bigger questions that we have been grappling with throughout this summit so far, as we figure out as a community how to show up in this moment, how to meet this moment, a challenging moment that it is in a lot of ways that we talked about yesterday. And some of those bigger questions that this opening panel is going to help us start to kind of get back into to set the tone for the day are really, what kind of society are we choosing to be? And particularly when it comes to aging and disability and how we show up for one another across the lifespan. And as we talked a lot about yesterday, so just to bring in some of those themes again to set that tone, we're in a moment that feels a lot like a battle of imaginations when it comes to what kind of society we are choosing to be. And I can't think of two people that I would more rather to have with me to set the tone for today's conversations, especially about aging and disability, because these are two really, frankly, badass ladies hanging out in philanthropy, but doing that in a way where they're bringing a lot of thought leadership, they're bringing a lot of bold thinking, and they're bringing a lot of moral clarity to the work. So I'm really excited to actually put them on a stage together for the first time. I don't think the two of you have had that chance, so I'm excited to see where this goes, and I know the only regret I'm going to have is that we don't have enough time to get into everything we would want to. And these two amazing people are two folks who probably need no introduction with this community, but Rebecca Cokley, who leads the disability rights portfolio at the Ford Foundation, and I should note she is the first person to be a program officer in disability rights at any major foundation in the U.S., and one of my wonderful sisters in this work, who I am deeply honored to have with us today, and Narda Ipakchi, who is vice president of policy at the SCAN Foundation, and you got to hear a little bit from Narda yesterday, but I'm excited to have her on the panel and not moderating today, because she'll get to share some of her views as well. And I just want to say part of why I'm so glad to have them both with us is because they are not just shaping the future of aging and disability policy, but they're doing that in a way where they understand that these two communities and these two sets of issues and policy areas are deeply intertwined. They're not separate. So excited to kind of cross the streams. So I kind of want to kick this off by just giving you both a chance to talk a little bit about how you're pushing the fields that you work in and that you play leadership roles in to think beyond the status quo. So as I ask the question, what does it mean to meet the moment? What does meeting the moment mean to each of you right now? And why is being in a bold place and thinking in a bold way rather than just holding the line so critical as we think about aging and disability policy? And Narda, I'll open with you.
Great. Well, I'm really excited to be here, and thanks to Rebecca and the whole Academy team for putting all this together, and obviously Rebecca's vision for bringing all these great people together and bringing that community forward. For the SCAN Foundation and for me personally, I think especially being here the last couple of days and hearing time and time again sort of just this craving and a desire for a system that really does meet the needs and preferences of the populations that we care about. And that, yes, we are in this unique moment where we're seeing unraveling of a lot of the systems and the programs that our populations rely on. But again, one thing we've heard time and time again throughout the last couple of days is even before this moment, these systems were not working for people. They're administratively burdensome. They're really hard to access, even if you're eligible. They were designed at a different time. Lifespans were different. People's, work life and retirement situations were different. And there's this opportunity now where we are seeing some of the unraveling of some of these programs to think about what we want the next 90 years, et cetera, to be. Because policies and programs should be able to evolve with the evolving needs of the populations that they serve. And so for us, it's really about, starting with what is it that people say they need, really learning that, people don't experience these programs in silos that we've created, but that they are full people with families and jobs and lives, and their healthcare coverage or their long-term care coverage is only one facet, but when it doesn't work well, it has ripple effects on all the other parts of their lives. And so if we can start with learning what really matters to people and what makes people be able to thrive in their home and communities, I think we can really design a system that works better for everybody, that is more efficient use of government dollars, and that ultimately doesn't leave anybody behind.
Cokley, same question to you.
This moment is a ever-changing landscape. I told someone the other day, some days it feels like you're walking up a descending escalator, and you're like, am I ever gonna get to the top? And when you're a teenager or an obnoxious kid, that activity is fun. But once you get to a certain point, you're like, are you kidding me? Is this where we're at? While the moment's ever-changing, the fundamental field of play hasn't really shifted. Disabled people, here's some news, disabled people are still poor. News break. Disabled people are still being discriminated against in school, in the workplace, and in society. I have not worked, there is no job that I have worked in the amazing jobs that I've had in the amazing places that I've been in, where I have not faced discrimination. And what has shifted, though, is that the disability community can no longer rely on the federal government as the source of aid and support for disabled people and their families. And the reality is, as disabled people, we've always known that we weren't going to be saved by government. We've always known that it wasn't going to be the benevolence of an able-bodied, mediocre man that's going to step in and save the day. They don't hand out those capes. We have to save ourselves. And the systems that exist to perpetuate themselves. And so when only 2% of philanthropic dollars go towards disability rights and advocacy work, every dollar counts. To me, and I think to Ford, meeting this moment means that more foundations come to the table. I'm so excited that Narda and I get to start playing together because the SCAN Foundation has just joined the President's Council on Disability Inclusion and Philanthropy, which I like to call the cool kids table. More folks can join if they want. You can be cool too. But we need to see greater commitment. We need to see funders get out of their own way and stop saying things like, we fund poverty, not disability, or we fund food insecurity, but not disability. The reality is you're not funding effectively, and so just admit it.
So say one thing,
of course,
which is just you made the point about not being able to rely on the benevolence of some random government man, which resonates with me. But also recognizing that in philanthropy, we are in a place of privilege, right? And the same way that I think we often ask our policy leaders, who are building up political capital, we want them to use it, we want them to burn it. You don't build political capital to just hold on to it. I feel the same with philanthropy. If we have privilege, we need to use that privilege because there are other stakeholders in the aging and disability ecosystem that don't have that same privilege or ability to sort of take a step back. So my other sort of message to philanthropy would be burn your privilege.
Privilege is its own checkbook. I tell people that all the time. Privilege is a checkbook. And, to quote Brittany Packnett Cunningham, budgets are moral documents. You spend your money on where your values are.
Well, so, okay, since you guys are, I mean, you don't even need me here. I just want to let the two of you have a conversation, but I'll do my part if I can. So a place I kind of want to get you both into conversation as well is, right, it's fairly recent that folks in philanthropy have started to think about aging and disability as connected, right? And so, Cokley, you were mentioning, and these were rooms you and I used to walk into when we were both at CAP together, right? We would go talk to a funder, and they would say the things you were saying. Oh, no, we fund education. We don't fund disability. And we would be like, what? Wait, you don't see the intersections here? You don't see that every issue is a disability issue? But increasingly, funders and folks across philanthropy, and the two of you are really a big part in making this happen, are understanding that really, really, really important to be understanding the intersections between aging and disability, right? And I there's a lot of things I could say about that, but I'd rather give you both the chance to talk about why that's so important and how you're thinking about that, especially with a room full of people who come from a policy-making space that still has a lot of silos.
One of my favorite activities used to be, and this is me being a petty Irish Sagittarian, was to walk into an aging conference and ask how many people consider themselves disabled. And then I would say to them, okay, for those of you that don't, on your way out, please leave me your parking placard. Because I think about so many of the times that the disability community has fought for rights, we've always fought with a blanket approach. We've always fought with that's the power of the ADA. If you look at the power of the definition of disability in the ADA, it's any mental or physical impairment that impacts your activities of daily living. It's not, if you're this age, if you're this race, it's not the following conditions. And so by its very nature, it was inclusive of the aging community. And I think oftentimes a lot of the rhetoric in both spaces, whether it be, 60 is the new 30, or, the only disability is a bad attitude, have really done both like an emotional disservice, but also a political, like small p political disservice towards keeping these communities separated from each other, which is by its very nature like purposeful, because if the aging community and the disability community got out of each other's own ways and put our egos aside, there's nothing we couldn't do. I remember being at ACL, the Administration for Community Living, and we had to come up with a mission statement. And it was like a civil war, because the aging side of the house didn't want to use the term empower because aging people had power. And the disability community didn't want to use the word enable because it implied that we were not able. And it literally was like, you think your organization's mission statement process was hard? This was like 18 months of wordsmithing. And we live in a world today, and I want to give a major shout out to Chad Bolt in the room. The asset limits reform to me is one of those critical places where aging and disability communities can really come together. It's one of the I would argue that it is one of the most important public policy issues of our time, to allow disabled folks and aging folks to be able to maintain their retirement without having to spend it down to access Medicaid. I don't see any family values issue bigger than the fact that the government is allowed to come in and tell you that you have to divorce your significant other if you or your child need Medicaid. How is that okay in 2026? And I think the fact that we blackmail aging and disabled people with their health care to force them into poverty is inexcusable. I've been thrilled to see, AARP, the National Council of Evangelicals, the U.S. Chamber, all weigh in with support for reforming asset limits. And the last thing that I would say, and Vallas, you started us off with a Ghostbusters reference, and I know Ghostbusters is your movie of choice when you talked about crossing the streams. And so when I think about the aging community and the disability community coming together, I find myself thinking like dogs and cats living together, human sacrifice, let's go.
There's so many reasons I put Rebecca Cokley on panels, but this is obviously top of that list, is the obscure movie references that are my favorite. Narda, I want to give you the chance to talk about this too, and just as I bridge you into that conversation, I also just want to say something you talk a lot about and that you think a lot about, which maybe is newer to leaders in philanthropy to think in these ways, but really is around movement building. And something you're doing a lot of thinking about is the possibilities inherent in intentionally uniting the aging and disability movements. Pick up off of where Cokley just left off, but add that piece in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we're seeing this right now in our political environment, right? It's good for those in power if various subpopulations and various groups are not aligned, right? It makes it a lot easier for bad policy to happen, quite frankly, right? Because folks are spending a lot of time blaming each other instead of looking at what the real problem is or who the real villain is. And so I think. Admittedly, for me, it's been humbling. I've always come from the aging lens, and it wasn't until quite recently in my career when I had an opportunity to work on the Hill with Michael Gamble McCormick, who is an amazing human being and disability policy expert, who really humbled me in terms of my understanding of what it meant to be, for example, a dually eligible individual and how different that is for someone who is an older adult versus someone who is a younger person with a disability, and all the other life factors, which I mentioned before, in terms of work and, being able to participate in your community, which are just different at, different parts of your lifespan, right? And so gaining a real appreciation for that just made me really just have a desire to bring more unification to these populations. But yes, it's also good for the policy movement. So, we can come up with the best policies possible, but if the aging and disability communities are going to policymakers with competing asks and tearing each other's policy agendas apart, that's not good for anyone. And what we do know is that the policies that move forward for aging and disability populations are good for everyone, not just aging and disabled populations. And so even beyond aging and disability, my hope is that we can bring other people and other movements along to make this case. I'll just share last year, for the first time and against my better judgment, we went to Disneyland with my 8-year-old daughter. And I won't forget when my husband made the comment of like, wow, how accessible Disneyland is, or it appears to be.
It used to be so much better.
Oh, it used to be better?
So much better.
Oh, interesting. But it was a really eye-opening moment for me because I knew that did not happen as a result of the benevolence of Mr. Walt, right? It happened because of decades and decades of tireless advocacy to make that move forward. And just imagine how much better our world could be if there was a more united front in that vein.
So something that we've been hearing a lot about, and I love that you guys are both kind of like, I didn't pay you to do this, but you're like perfectly setting up a bunch of the conversations we're going to be having today, including Cokley's prompter on asset limits, which we're going to be hearing a ton about in the panels to come because there is so much momentum around eliminating savings penalties. But something that you both do a lot of thinking about and a lot of talking about off of stages, but I want to give you a chance to talk about because it's come up in a lot of the conversations so far during this summit is kind of the need for balancing multiple time horizons at the same time, right? Like holding that North Star, remembering and not losing sight of what that big long-term North Star vision is, but also seizing those opportunities when they emerge to even make incremental progress along the way. And Narda, I want to start with you on this because something you talk a lot about, and I love kind of how you put this, is how there's there might be the people who are like the big vision people, there might be the people who are the folks who are thinking more practically and pragmatically, but that they need each other, right? Talk a little bit about that and how we might think about that as a larger community holding those multiple time horizons right now.
Yeah, I find it really annoying that there seems to be this sort of like false divide of incrementalism and big picture thinking. Those two things are not at odds with one another. And as you said, Rebecca, they need each other to be able to work well, right? And so we have so many people who work in this space who have really surgical, technical knowledge about the programs that are the populations that we care about rely on. And by the very nature of their jobs have sometimes been forced to only work within the confines of a very a rigid system that doesn't necessarily encourage a lot of innovation, right? That's the way the system works today. That's not the way the system has to work forever. I mean, the programs that we're talking about, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, there was a time where they didn't exist, right? And so it's important for us to be able to have, even as we're doing work in the incremental space, what that North Star vision is. I always talk about this piece of marble, right? And if you're chiseling a piece of marble, you're not trying to chisel it just to chisel and winnow it down to nothing. You're trying to create some sort of sculpture with it. And so keeping that sort of end North Star sculpture in mind is really important. And for the big vision people, and I sort of find myself falling into that category more and more. And again, want to recognize that philanthropy does provide the privilege to be able to do that. But if I didn't have some of those super, technical experts providing some of that constructive criticism and pushing me on how things would actually work, that vision would never become a reality. And so I just really hope that we can put our sort of take our hats off of I'm an incrementalist or I'm a big sky person, and just what do we really want for our society? What do we want our new social contract to be, as Rebecca has talked about? And how do we work towards that, both incrementally and in terms of bold ideas? And at Scan Foundation, we do really try to make sure that we're doing both.
Yeah, same question to you, Cokley.
When I think about before I came to the Ford Foundation, I think when I was at CAP, and I remember actually getting it's going to sound really funny now, I remember getting a call from Darren Walker, who of course was our past CEO at Ford. And he asked me the most random question I think I've ever been asked by somebody, especially someone who I didn't really know well. And Darren asked me, I was like, Rebecca, what would your ideal bathroom be like? Mm-hmm. And I remember saying, it was not a question I expected to be asked by anyone, let alone did I expect to be asked it by Darren Walker. And I remember saying, what? And he's like, your ideal bathroom. What would a bathroom be like that works for you? And I said, okay, first off, why are you asking me this? And he's like, we're redesigning the building, and you're one of our grantee partners. And it struck me, he's like, it struck me last night at 10 o'clock, so I wasn't going to call you at 10. But I want to make sure that there's a bathroom here that works for you. And so when we talk about incrementalism, I find myself thinking it's the paper towels that are down low so I don't have to do the high jump. Mm-hmm. It's the sink that I don't have to jump into to wash my hands. It's actually being able to reach the soap. It's having a mirror that I can see myself in. And to think about what that has meant for me, I wasn't an employee. I was a grantee. I visited the Ford Center for Social Justice at that point maybe 3 or 4 times a year. But the fact that mattered to a place as big as, the Ford Foundation. So when I think about the incrementalism and the big fight, I think about the bathroom inside of that big building. And I find myself thinking about how nice it is that I don't have to put my purse on the floor of a bathroom. And that there's a nice little sign outside and I can bang on the door if somebody's using it and then be like, who's using it? I know I am the only little person in this entire building. And at the same time, it's a place where we come up with really lofty, big ideas like a cross-team economic policy collaborative, where our Future of Workers team, our Tech and Society team, our Gender, Racial, Ethnic Justice team, and the U.S. Disability Rights team came together to noodle about what would be cool things to work on in the economic space, and how can we move $6 million to a wide variety of our grantees in the space, with the purpose of encouraging them to work together across these different sectors to come up with new ideas and see what sticks when you throw it against the wall. And I think philanthropy in this moment, as a lot of people are having different reactions to the political climate that we're in. We should be thinking about what it means to be bold. We should be taking risks because, as Narda said, and as I agree, I often say that my job is spinning the eugenicist checkbook. we operate from so much privilege, and I think every single day about the fact that Henry Ford tried to eradicate people like me from existing. And now I'm at the foundations, moving millions of dollars to people he didn't want to exist in 2026. And that's a lot of privilege. And that's a lot of cognitive dissonance, depending on the day of the week. But that's why we're in the jobs that we're in. And if we're not being bold, if philanthropy is not being bold, then get out of the way.
I'm going to give you each a chance to offer one sentence to close out in terms of what message do you have, what kind of advice or closing thoughts do you have for this community, again, as we seek to meet this moment, but particularly thinking about the future of aging and disability policy?
I mean, I'll just say there's nothing that can happen without the community around that's bought in, that's working together. And, aging and disability is one facet of that collaboration, but it has to be even bigger than that. I mean, people need to understand why policy that works well for people across the lifespan, regardless of your income, regardless of your race, regardless of your ethnicity or where you live, is not political. And if we can just help the public understand that, that when somebody wins, it doesn't mean you lose. There's, I think, a lot of power in that. And so I really hope we can do a better job of just messaging why good policy is good for everybody.
I've been kind of obsessed. I don't know if people have noticed me doing this while I've been sitting up here. I've been kind of obsessed with looking at our shoes. Vallas is wearing these amazing pointy-toed leopard print heels. Narda's got these badass Docs that honestly, if I wore them, I could get on any ride at Six Flags. Those are hot. And I'm wearing mom heels from Naturalizer. That I've actually climbed fences at the White House in before. That's a whole nother story. And I find myself thinking, what shoes are you wearing for this moment? Are you ready to throw on your Docs to hit the streets? Are you ready to throw on your heels to visit the Capitol? Do you have the right shoes or the right tools in your toolbox for the moment that we're in? And if not, honey, it's time to go shopping.
I love that, especially as somebody who keeps a lot of different shoes in my office, because I need all of them, and anyone who's been to my office can attest to this. Please join me in thanking these amazing women for starting our day off with some serious marching orders and a lot of big thinking.